Hey guys, welcome back. We are going to continue this week our unit in factoring. And what I'm going to show you how to do this week is when you have a leading coefficient that is greater than 1. So I'm going to write just some random trinomial up here on the screen. And when I say leading coefficient, I'm talking about the number that's in front of the term that has the highest degree. Okay, and what the degree is the exponent. So if you look at this one that has an exponent of 2, this x has no exponent, so technically it's a 1. And this 6, there is no letter. So that technically would have like an exponent of 0, like an x to the 0 power you can think is attached to it. Because remember, anything to the 0 power is 1. So we can always do an extra times 1 on the end if I need to. Okay, so all that to say is that this term right here is my leading term because it has the highest degree. It has a degree of 2. This has a degree of 1, and this has a degree of 0. And then when I say leading coefficient, I'm talking about whatever number is right in front of it. Since there was no number on this one, I know the number was technically a 1. So in the last video, we figured out how to factor when you have a leading coefficient of 1. But what if your leading coefficient is like 9? Now what do you do? And that's what this whole week we're going to be dealing with, is what do we do when the leading coefficient is bigger than 1? And the reason we say A is bigger than 1 is because standard form looks like this: ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c, oops, I changed to red, change it back to red there, where a, b, and c would be numbers, just any numbers. So when a, that's your leading coefficient, is something bigger than 1, we have not figured out how to factor that yet. And that's what we're going to learn this week, and that's really the main goal of this week. Okay, so let me start breaking it down for you guys. So the first sentence on this page says, trinomials in standard form are written like this. And that's what I just talked about on the last slide. So A is always just kind of the letter we use for the leading coefficient. B is the middle one, and C is our last one. So when A is equal to 1, and this is what we did all last week, so technically you can think about there being a 1 right there, we would take C, which is your last number there, the one with no letters, and we would write out factors of it. So factors of 28 are 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 times 7, and that's it. And technically it's a negative 28 because we have this negative sign right here. So we know that in this list over here, one of the numbers has to be a negative when we multiply it in order to get negative 28. And we're looking for ones that will add to get me to this middle term, which is negative 3. So looking at these sets of numbers, I'm looking at this 4 and 7 and thinking that that would be able to work, because if I do 4 minus 7, I'll get to negative 3. So that's if I really were to write this out, positive 4 minus 7. So the 7 has to be negative. So when I fill out my binomial, I'll make the 4 a positive, and I'll make the 7 a negative. And then I know if I were to FOIL this out, so if I were to actually multiply this out, I would end up with the exact same thing that I started with, this trinomial right here. So that is it. That was all the steps for factoring when A is 1. You write out the factors of this last term right here, and you create a list, and then you just pick the ones that will add to get you that middle term. And that's it. So now let's talk about how we're going to do that when we have something that is bigger than 1. Well, the first step is you always want to look for a GCF, which we talked about last week. And that's if they can all be divided by the exact same thing. It'll be a lot more simple if we can take out whatever that thing is. So when I look at the second example, I'm noticing I have a 2, a 10, and a 12, and all of those things can be divided by 2. So let's go ahead and do it. Divide all of them by 2, and what would be left? So the first term would just be x squared, the middle one would be 5x, and the last one would be 6. So I was able to take out a GCF, and now that made it easy, because if you look what's in the parentheses, my leading coefficient right here, right in front of the x, is a 1 again. And so by taking out the 2 and moving it out to the front, what I have left in here will be really easy to factor. In fact, let's go ahead and do it. So I'll keep my 2 that I have there. I'll write my binomial parentheses. And remember, I need to look for numbers that multiply to equal 6. So let me write that list out over here. That would be 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. And I want to choose the ones that add to get me the middle term right here, which is 5. So looking at that list, 1 and 6 and 2 and 3, 2 and 3 would be the ones that add to get me to 5. Now you might think, well, wait a second, you could also use 1 and 6 because 6 minus 1 equals 5. But if the 1 is a negative, then when you multiply them and you do 6 times negative 1, you would get negative 6, which doesn't work because this number down here was a positive 6. So that means I definitely need to use the 2 and 3 because if I keep those both positive, they add to get me 5 and multiply to give me positive 6, so I know that I'm good to go. So I'm going to choose 2 and 3 and fill up my binomial. So x plus 2 and x plus 3. And then this down here is my final answer, including that 2 on the outside. I had taken the 2 out as part of the GCF, and then I just factored this red part, which just had a leading coefficient of 1, into the blue binomials. And that's it, and we leave our answer like that. Okay, so let me recap. When a is equal to 1, and a is always this number here, so if you don't see a number there, a is 1. Then you factor regularly by first starting out by writing the factors of that number, so write those out, and then choose the ones that add to get you that middle term. Nice and easy. When a is something bigger than 1, like in this example, look to see if there's a GCF, and that's just something that all the numbers can be divided by. In that case, we did. Okay, so what we're going to talk about mainly in this video is what do we do if there's not a GCF. So when I look at this example, I have the number 4, 13, and 3. There's no number that I could divide all of those things by. I can't divide them by 2, I can't divide them by 3, I can't divide them all by 13. Like, they don't all have some number that I can divide them all by. And that's the main goal of today's video, is to show you what we're going to do when we have situations like this where the leading coefficient is not 1 and I can't just divide them all out by something to make it 1. Okay, so here's your steps. We're going to still do the same thing. You're still going to list factors of C. You're still going to start by listing factors of that last number. So this is easy because for 3, there's only one option. You can only get it by 1 times 3. Okay, but now, since this is not a 1, you also need to list factors of A. And that's what this step 1 over here says. List factors of A and C. Okay, so what are my factors of A, which is 4? I could do 1 times 4, or I could do 2 times 2. So now I just need to, that's step 1, list all the factors of A and C. So I did A right here and I did C right here. So now I know that my answer is going to be some combination of either the red numbers or the green numbers that I have written. So let's go ahead and set up my binomials. So to get to 4x squared, I could get that by doing 2x times 2x, because think about how I would start foiling. When I start foiling, like when I write all these out, the first thing I do is going to be this, 2x times 2x, which gives you 4x squared, which is exactly what I wanted. So I could start my binomials by doing 2x times 2x, or I could also do it, and I'm going to write my second option down here, by doing this one, 4x times 1x. Because again, when I FOIL, my first step will be to multiply those, which gives me 4x squared. Okay, so it's going to be one of these two options. It's either going to be this or this, and I'm not sure which one. But once I have those options done, I can stop thinking about factors of 4. The only reason I needed that was to come up with these numbers in the parentheses that I already have. So now I just have to try combinations of this with the 1 and the 3. So since that was a positive, and since I was a positive, I know both of those numbers are either going to be positive or both of them are going to be negative, because a negative times a negative is also a positive. So that's something I can try out as well. Let's try putting the 1 here, and let's try making it positive, and the 3 here. And you just have to FOIL it out and check and see if that worked. So when I FOIL this out, I know this part, of course, is going to give me 4x squared. This part would give me 6x, and then now I'm going to do the 1 times the 2x. That would give me 2x. And then lastly, the 1 times the 3, which gives me 3. When I combine my like terms, these ones right here, that's going to give me 8x. And that is not what this number is, which means that's not the right answer. So I know that's not going to work. So let's go back, and instead of putting the 1 here and the 3 here, let's try what would it look like if I switched it. What if I put the 3 here and the 1 here? Okay, so let's try that. So 2x times 2x, again, gives me 4x squared. 2x times 1 gives me 2x. 3 times 2x gives me 6x, and then of course 3 times 1 gives me 3. Again, when I add these, I'm getting 8x, and what I needed was 13x, so that can't be right. Okay, so before I try doing negative number combinations, let's just move to the second binomial. So let's move to the ones at the bottom that had 4x and x. And just try the same thing. So what if I put the 1 here and the 3 here? What would that look like? Well, this part would be 4x squared. This part would give me 12x. This part would give me 1x. And this part would give me 3. When I combine these together, I get 13x, which is the middle term. So I know that this was the winning combination, and that's how I factor this trinomial. So I can erase that other stuff and just write my answer as 4x plus 1 parentheses x plus 3. When I FOILed that out, that was the only one that gave me the combination that I needed. Now, just a little trick for you in all that like guessing and checking is when you check your foiling, you know this first one's always going to work. That's always going to give you 4x squared. And you know this last one's always going to work. That always gave us the plus 3. So this whole time, we were good to go on the first term and the last term, and the part we had to make was the middle term. So that part came from multiplying this and this when we FOILed it here, and from this and this when we FOILed it here. So when you check, you can just check these far ones and check these close ones right here and see if they add up to get you what you want. You don't really need to FOIL every single thing out every single time. Okay, so that's the gist of how that goes. It's pretty hard to like catch that and catch on to it like perfectly just watching it once. So I'm going to go through a few more with you until we kind of get in the flow of it, and I'm going to do that several more times before I have you guys try some on your own. Okay, so I'll do both of these for you. So again, we're going to start off in the exact same way and write out my factors of C. And in this case, again, it's just going to be 1 times 3. And then I'm going to write out my factors of A, and in this case, it's just going to be 1 times 2. So not a whole lot of options here. So that means that this would be 1x squared, which I can actually just write x squared. X squared, oh, not x squared, sorry, x and 2x. And when I first FOIL those, when I multiply these, this would give me 2x squared, which is exactly what that first term is, so I know that I've written it down correctly. So I'll leave it in that order, x times 2x. And there's no other combination to get 2x squared. Like, that's the only thing. I mean, you could, of course, just flip-flop them and write 2x and x, but that doesn't matter. That's the exact same thing. So the order that you write the parentheses doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm done with that. I've figured out my factors of 2. There's not going to be a whole lot of guess and check because there's not very many factors. So I'm either going to put the plus 1 here and the plus 3 here and check that. If that doesn't work, I'll just flip these. Alright, so let's FOIL it out. Remember when I'm checking this, a quicker way of doing it is just check the outside, check the inside ones. So the outside one gives us 3x and the inside one gives me 2x. What will those add up to be? 5x, which is exactly what I wanted. So I know that this is correct, and this is the way that I factor it. And so this is my final answer. And that's it. If we want to factor the whole thing just to check, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing to do. So the first one gives me 2x squared, and then the second one gives me 3x, this one gives me 2x, and the last one gives me the number 3. Putting these together gives me the 5x that I needed. So we're good to go. Okay. If you need to look this over, pause the video, and I'm going to clear it off and show you the second one. Alright, so the second one, again, starting in the same way, write your factors of 6. That's either 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. And then write your factors of A. So for 5, your only options are 1 times 5. Which is nice because that means when you set up the binomials, you only have a choice of using those numbers. So 5x and 1x. And again, that can be flip-flopped if you want to change and put the x here and the 5x here, that doesn't matter. Okay, and then I'm just have to guess and check with the numbers that I have over here for 6. I'm either going to put a 1 and a 6 here, or I'll do the 6 here and the 1 here, or if none of that works, then I'll do the 2 and the 3. So I'll do the 2 here and the 3 here. If that doesn't work, I'll change this to a 3 and change this to a 2. So I'm just guessing and checking by using these numbers over here. So And what I ultimately need to get to is negative 17. Okay, so let's give this a try. Since this is a negative, I'm guessing that we want to make these numbers negative. And remember, they both have to be negative since this was a positive. 6 was a positive. So negative times a negative will give me that positive. So why don't we just try it out? Let's do the negative 1 here and a negative 6 here. Remember, that's okay because when you multiply those together, you get positive 6. All right, so let's try and work this so we can get negative 17. Again, a quick way of checking is just check the far ones, check the close ones. These far ones will give me negative 30, and these close ones gives me, I forgot the x, negative 30x, and these close ones gives me negative 1x, or negative x. This in no way could ever get me to negative 17, so that must not be right. So let's try changing it. Let's just flip-flop, and instead of the negative 1 here and the negative 6 here, let's just trade those places. So let's put the negative 6 here and the negative 1 here. And again, we'll do the same thing. Multiply the far ones, and that gives me negative 5x. And then multiply these close ones, that gives me negative 6x. If I were to put those together, I would get negative 11x, which does not match the negative 17 that I needed. So the 1 and the 6 didn't work, so let's move on and try the 2 and the 3. So I'm going to put, and if this doesn't work, we'll change order. I'll put a negative 2 here and a negative 3 here. Checking these far ones, that gives me negative 15x. And checking this close one, that gives me negative 2x. And that does add up to give me negative 17x, so I found the combination. I found exactly the answer that works. So I'll erase all my lines now. What I have written in the parentheses is my final answer. If I were to FOIL this all out, I would get exactly the original trinomial. And we're good to go. Okay, pause it if you need to look over that, and hit play when you're ready to move on. Alright, so I'm going to have you guys pause the screen for the very last one and try it on your own, and I'll do the first one again with you. So starting out by writing your factors of C. So for that, it's going to be 1 times 4 or 2 times 2. And then writing your factors for A. So for the number 6, that's 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. Since we have multiple options up here for 6, that means I'm going to have multiple options to try my binomial. It's either going to be 1y and 6y, or it could be the 2 and the 3 one, which would be 2y and 3y. And again, the reason I would do that is because when I start foiling and I multiply that, I get 6y squared there. If I FOIL these, I'd also get 6y squared there. So either of these could be an option. Now that I have that, I'm done talking about my factors of A. I've written out my 2 options. Now it's just a matter of choosing the right factors of C to put in the place. Okay, so since it's actually a negative 4, remember one of these numbers in both sets of options will have to be a negative. Okay, and I don't know which one it's going to be. I'll have to play around with that and check. I am going to erase this and just move it up a little bit. Alright, so I erased it and wrote it on the upper left-hand side. Let's start with the 2 and the 2. Now I'll give you a hint. It is usually often the numbers that are closer together. So I'm going to try the 2 and the 2 just because those are closer numbers together than the 1 and the 4. And usually those just tend to work out quicker. So let's try putting the 2 here and the 2 here. And remember, one of them has to be negative. So I'll just randomly choose that one to be negative and this one to be positive. The reason one has to be negative and one has to be positive is because they have to multiply together to give me that negative number. Alright, so let's try foiling. Remember, I just have to check the last arc and the close arc. So this last arc gives me negative 2y, and then this arc here gives me 2 times 6 is 12, so positive 12. If I add that together, I get 10y, which is not even close to negative 5y, so that can't be right. So what if I just change the signs? What if I put the positive 2 here and the negative 2 here? Let's try that. So when I FOIL that, check the longer arc would give me y times 2 is 2y, and then this shorter arc gives me negative 12y. And that just adds up to give me negative 10y, which is still not what I wanted. Okay, so before I just forget trying the 2's, let's try the 2's down here in this option. So I'll put a 2 here, 2 here. I'll just randomly pick this one to be positive and this one to be negative. So checking this longer arc, that would give me 4y, and checking this shorter arc, that gives me negative 6y. When I add those together, I get negative 2y, which is not negative 5y. Okay, so let's flip-flop those. Let's put the positive 2 here and the negative 2 here. Checking this long arc, that gives me negative 4y, and checking this middle arc, that gives me 6y. That adds together to give me 2y, which is still not what I wanted. That means that 2 and 2 is not working at all. So I can cross that off, and I know that 1 and 4 has to be the winning combination. Now it's just a matter of knowing what set of parentheses to put it in. So why don't I try putting, let's do the 4 here and the 1 here, and I'll make this negative and this positive. So check the longer arc, y times negative 4 is negative 4y, and 1 times 6, that's positive 6y. When I add that together, I get 2y, so that doesn't work. Okay, so we can now try just switching spots. So if I put the negative 4 here and the positive 1 here, the longer arc will give me y, and the shorter arc gives me negative 24y. If I add those together, I cannot get negative 5y. So you can see how this will start to go really fast because you can check them in your head pretty quickly, even without writing them out if you get good at it. Which you will really quickly. Okay, I'm thinking that first one's not giving us much success, so let's move to the bottom one and try maybe the 4 here. I'll do the positive 4 there, and let's try the negative 1 here. Okay, so this long arc gives me 2y times 4 is 8y, and then this part gives me negative 3y. That adds together to give me 5y, which is really close to what I want, but not exactly. So let's just try switching the signs. Let's make this the negative and this the positive. And we might be able to get it now. So now if we do that, the signs are switched. This gives me negative 8y, and this gives me positive 3y. When I add those together, I get 5y, which is awesome. That's what I wanted. So I can erase everything else now. I know that this binomial that I have written at the bottom is the correct one. So this is my final answer. When I FOIL this out, and I'll actually show you, you'll get the correct thing. So 2y times 3y is 6y squared. 2y times negative 4 is negative 8y. 1 times 3y is 3y. And 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. And when I combine these together, I get the negative 5 that we already talked about over here. And that all of those match that original trinomial. Okay, so that one I showed you what it would look like with a lot of guess and check work. And again, like I wrote it all out just because I wanted to show you, but oftentimes you can almost imagine placing the numbers in the spot, and you can kind of FOIL out in your head and determine if it's right or wrong, sometimes even before you ever write anything down. So it does actually go pretty quickly. Okay, so now I want you guys to pause the video here and try factoring the last one. So again, start by writing out factors of C, which luckily you only have one option, and then factors of A, which we have more options here. We have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, or 3 times 4. Okay, so you're going to have 3 possibilities to work through, but that won't be hard because on this number you only have 1 possibility, so it won't take very long. So let's try writing 12C times C, 2C times 6C, and 3C times 4C. And I'm getting all those combinations just by all these numbers right here. So now I'm going to erase that because I've written my combinations, and now it's your job to take the factors of 5 and determine which of these should it go in to FOIL out to match the original. So pause the video here and figure that out and hit play when you're ready to check. Okay, so just thinking through the factors of 5 that we already wrote down, which were 1 times 5, but I knew one of them had to be negative since it's a negative 5. I thought it through it really quickly in my head, and I didn't even write anything down until I knew what it was. And the reason I could think through it pretty quickly is because I knew 3 times 5 would give me 15, and then if I do the negative 1 times 4, that's minus 4. So 15 minus 4 gives me 11, which is exactly what I needed. So that means that's the correct answer. So all of this can go away, and I know that this right here is going to be my winning combination. When I factor or FOIL all that out, I get exactly that original trinomial. Okay, That's it for today, you guys. If all that made sense, then you're good to go. And from now on out, we should be able to factor trinomials when the first number is a 1 and when the first number is something bigger than 1. Okay, have a good day, you guys, and I will see you later.